Welcome back, my fellow Python programmers, to a brand new video, and in this one we're going to be looking at reading and writing files and exceptions. So if at any point you feel that you're enjoying the contents of this video, please make sure to slap that like button and let's go ahead and get started. Alright, so this was a very quick one because all that I did was create this Python file, which is reading files. Because the first step that you need to do is that you need to download this poem.txt that I've provided you in the description or in the top comment. Once you have that, you need to select it and drag it over into the code right here, and it will tell you you're trying to move this. Now obviously I'm just trying to copy it. I'm just going to refactor. In your case, you can just do that, and now we have the poem.txt. Now the problem is now it disappeared from here. I mean, I could copy it and paste it back in here so that I have the two versions. You don't have to do that because you won't be using it anywhere else, but you will in just a bit and you'll see what I mean. But for now we have this poem.txt, and now I'm going to write the code. Okay, so let's go ahead and break down this code. First of all, on the first line right here, we are assigning the string poem.txt to the variable file path. Keep in mind, this is possible only because they are in the same directory. And when I say directory, I mean the same file. So right here, this is where I created the project named code, and if you're not sure where it is, you can always right click, go to open with and click on explore, and it will take you to where that code project or code file exists. Double click inside of the code and you can see that readfiles.py and poem are in the same file, which means that they are in the same directory. So when these two files, or the file that you're trying to open, is in the same directory as the .python file or the .py file, you can do the following. You can simply refer to it as the poem.txt. Next, we have this line right here. So this line uses the open function to open the file specified by the file path using the read mode, which is right here, the R. The with statement right here ensures that the file is properly closed after it has been used. And then the opened file will be referred to as the file right here within its block of code. Now, you might be thinking, why do we need to make sure that we close the file after we finished reading from it? Because if you don't close the file, there could be data leakage. Now, you can read more about data leakage later on, but basically your file might be corrupted. Some things might get destroyed inside of the file. So we need to make sure that we close the file once we finish extracting information from it. Now let's look at what we did inside of the block. Inside of the block, we use the read method right here that is called on the file object. Remember, this file refers to the poem.txt. And this method reads the entire content of the file into a single string that we've called the contents. And finally, after we exit out of this with, which means we've closed the file, we are printing out all the contents. And by the way, I kept this right here so that you can see that the poem.txt and the reading files are both in the code. Now I'm gonna close it like this, and I'm going to right click and I will run, and I will drag this right here to the top right corner, and as you can see, this is what we get, and this is the Python poem. I used ChatGPT to generate it. Of course, I did not come up with this alone. So basically, in the glow of a screen late into the night, a student sits, eyes gleaming bright. You can continue reading through this. It's beautiful, really. It even uses 2M Python dev, which I am so proud of, and uses the mentor and stuff, amazing things. But let's continue on, because what if the file that we're trying to read is not in the same directory and it's somewhere else? How would we handle this? Well, I have another poem.txt right here, but not inside of the directory, inside of the resource files. So what we need to do, or what you need to do as well, is you need to copy this poem.txt and put it anywhere on your PC or your Mac. And then you need to right click, go to properties, and you need to copy this directory right here. So this is called the absolute path of a file. The one that we were working with right here is called the relative path. So I will duplicate this line using Ctrl D, and then I'm going to say Ctrl V right here to pass it in, and then add a backslash, because whenever we are going deeper into a directory, we add this backslash. So first of all, we start off at D. This is the section of my hard drive. Then we go into the Python for YouTube. Then we go into 24 files and exceptions, resource files, poems.txt. But there is a bit of a problem in here. The problem is that you can see we're using a backslash. And if you've watched the previous video where we talked about escape characters, we know that the backslash creates special characters. So what should we do about this? Well, we can use a simple R at the start of the string, and you can see that the 24 is no longer special. So the R before the string starts tells Python to treat the string as a raw string, which means that the backslashes are treated as literal characters and not as some kind of special or escape characters. But it's very important to keep in mind that if you're using absolute paths, this can make your code less portable, meaning that if you send this code to somebody else and you're using an absolute path, that other person or whoever is using your code might not have this poem.txt in the same path. So using a relative path but making sure that you share your code with the file is a better way of sending such things. But anyway, let's go ahead and test this out. If I right click and I run, you can see that I get this same output and everything goes well. But you need to keep in mind that now what we're doing is we're getting all of this information in bulk. This is not a big problem because we have only like 30 or 40 lines of poem right here, so it's not a big problem. We just read the entire file and we dump it into contents and we print it out. But what if we had gigabytes of information and we simply needed a few lines? In that case, reading the bulk information would simply stress our computer out. Now, I'm going to do a Ctrl// just to comment this out because we don't need it anymore. We'll simply use the relative path right here. Next thing we need to think of is how we can just read line by line instead of reading this in bulk. Okay, so as you can see, we've created a loop right here that iterates over each line in a file. So you might be confused, what the heck is happening? If I right click and I run, you can see that I sort of get the same output except for that extra space, and I'll tell you how we can get rid of that. But for now, let's talk about what happens when you actually iterate over an object that is of type file. So when you iterate over such an object in Python, what happens is it reads each line from the file one after the other. But notice how there's an extra new space after each line. That is because a new line in a file includes the \n. So to avoid this, what you can do is you can use the .strip right here. And basically what this does is it removes any extra white space. And when we right click and run, you can see that this looks good. And as I told you, this basically gives us the same result, but with extra lines of code. But keep in mind, when you're working with gigabytes, the .read would take you a lot longer than this right here, especially if you're just trying to read the first 50 to 30 lines from a file. And there's also another method that allows us to read lines, which is ironically called readlines. And as you can see right here, the output is the same. So basically the read lines read all the lines in a file and returns them as a list where each element of the list is a single line from the file. Now, keep in mind that this is more taxing on the memory, since what we're doing is, again, we're dumping all of the information into a list, but this can be very useful in situations where you want to, I don't know, maybe access the single lines using an index, or maybe you want these lines accessed later on. So for example, right here, I can, for example, say that lines at position number 6, and I want that printed out. So print lines at position number 6, right click and run. And at the end, let me just comment this out for a second. Right click and run, and as you can see, a channel where code and creativity weave and ebb. Wow, that's amazing. So now that we were able to read the lines, let's go ahead and explore the data that we have from these lines. First of all, let's actually count how many lines there are. So remember, I told you that when we use read lines, we're reading every single line from the file. So what we can do, and once we read these lines, we are actually putting them as items in a list. So now what we can do is we can actually check the length of these lines, and when we right click and run, we can see that we get 39 lines. Now let's go ahead and try and count how many letters we have. So to do that, instead of printing out the length, I'm going to count this out, and in here I'm going to create a variable that is the letters underscore count, and it's going to be equal to, well, 0. And then I will uncomment this, and every single time that we read through a line, I'm going to say that the letters count plus equals, meaning that I'm going to be incrementing it by the length of each line, because remember, each line is made up of what? It's made up of the letters, and it's a string, so we can count how many characters there are and print it out. So when I right click and I run, you can see that I don't have anything because I forgot to print out the actual letter count, and you can see that we have 1430 characters or letters with the white spaces included inside of our file. And finally, just for the fun of it, let's go ahead and print out all the lines that have student or the word student in them. So I'm going to say if the string student is in the line, then I'm going to print out, or actually, you know what? I already have it right here. I'm going to print out the line, and I'm going to add an indentation because now we're working often with an if statement inside of a for loop, inside of a with. So right click and run, and you can see that these are the sentences or the lines in our poem that contain the word student. So a student sits, eyes gleaming bright, through videos the student travels far, of a student and a channel, an educational collage. I don't even know what that is. Anyway, you can also try and test out 2M. For example, let's see how many lines I have 2M. Boom, there we go. Welcome, says the voice from the 2M Python dev, which is Michael. Should have added Michael. Okay, fellow Python programmers, congratulations on understanding and finally figuring out how you can read from a file. This is an indispensable skill, and you'll be definitely using it throughout your Python programming journey. But we don't stop here, because now we want to understand how we can write to a file. So let's go ahead and look at that. Okay, so on this line, as we've done before, we simply create the file path, but this time this is going to be the output.txt, and I don't have an output.txt in here, nor do you. So what gives right here? Basically what we've done is we've created, or we're going to create, a new file that is called, or will be called, the output.txt. And how will this be created? It will be created when we go to this line. Now, this is the exact same line that we had right here, except for a small minute detail, which is the W. So the R right here means that we were in the reading mode. The W right here means that we are going to be in the in the writing mode. So inside the block, the write method of the file object is used to write a string to a file. And now when we right click and we run, we don't get anything, but if we look at the projects, we can see that we have a new Python file or a new txt file. When we double click to open it up, you can see that this is a single line of text. How cool is that? But what if you wanted to write multiple lines? Okay, so as you can see right here, I have the list that is lines, and you can see that each line ends with a \n. Do you remember what this \n does? Basically, it takes us to a new line. So now when I right click and I run, again, nothing is printed out, but if we look at the output.txt, you can see that we get the following. Now notice that this first line is added right next to this is a single line of text. Why? Because right here we did not use the \n. So when I do use the \n and I right click and I run, you can see that now, there we go. You can see that the first line is on a different line than you have the second line and the third line. And also, of course, keep in mind that we're always overriding our file. We're not always adding to it. We'll see later on how we can actually add to such file. But for now, I want to show you a different way of doing this. Instead of using a for loop, let me comment this out. I'm going to use a readlines. So this is similar to the readlines, except that this time, what does it do? I guess at this point you can start guessing. I mean, these things are easy. The write lines, write the lines, and the read lines, read the lines. I mean, yes, it does not take a genius to do that. But what if we wanted to actually add more lines to this file? How would this happen? And when I say write more to this file, I don't mean to do it on this one, because if, for example, I duplicate this, hold Shift Alt and move it down, and I right click and I run, you can see that I actually do append this file, but it's not actually appending because we're doing all of this and then we are outputting it to the file. We're overriding it later on. I mean, what if we open the file again in here and we try to write? Let me show you what I mean. So I'm going to copy this, paste it in here, and I'm going to say this line to add. If I right click and I run, you can see that now I have this line to add and I don't have any of the previous line that I've added. That is because when I open this file again, I wrote to it. And this is the problem that we face. How do we make sure that we don't override all of the information that is inside of the file already? Well, it's all about changing the mode, and there are a lot of modes. There's the read, there's the write, there's also the A, which stands for append. So now when I right click and I run, we can see that in the output file we have this is a single line, first line, second line, third line, this is a single line of text, and finally this line is to add. So any data written to the file is automatically added at the end when you're in the append mode without deleting or overriding any existing content. And later on we're going to see another way or another mode right here, but that's going to be for a challenge later on. Alright, fellow Python programmers, congratulations! Now you know how to read from a file, you know how to write to a file, and you even know how to append a file when it already has information. But now it's time to get serious, because so far we've only been using strings and we've been writing .txt files. Now it's time to look for something that is more practical, which is a .json file, and this is something that you'll be working with a lot in your professional career. And the JSON file is basically a way for us to write not lists or strings, but dictionaries and real pieces of information into a file, and also reading from a file that has real pieces of information. So let's go ahead and delve in. Okay, so as you can see right here, we've done this twice and I've made a mistake. Anyways, as you can see right here, we've imported the JSON file. We have a dictionary that is the user data, and it has keys, username, score, and achievements, and it has values for these keys, user 123, 450, and a list of the achievements that this particular user has achieved. Then we open up the file, as we've done before, in the writing mode, and this time, instead of using the .txt, we've used the .json file, and instead of writing the entire Word file, we just used F for abbreviation. But then inside we have this dump. Now, before I tell you what this dump does, let me tell you what is a JSON file, and maybe it will look better once you actually see what it does or how it looks. So as you can see, when we right click and we run, we have this user data.json. Double click on it and you can see that this is all of the information. Let me actually remove this. All of the information that we had is now stored in this .json file. So a JSON file is basically a text-based file used to store and exchange, and this is the keyword here, exchange data in a structured, readable format using key and value pairs and lists and arrays and etc. So why did I emphasize the word exchange? Because JSON files are actually used to exchange information between two people. If you want to send some information to a fellow colleague or you receive information that you need to read through, then you receive it in the form of a JSON file that is something similar to this one. So basically, this is what we do in here. Now, let's talk about the dump because it's kind of conspicuous. We don't know what it does. We know, because you probably figured it out, it writes the information similar to how the write works with a .txt file. But the JSON dump function is used to serialize, and this is very important. It serializes the data into a JSON formatted stream and then writes it to a file. This effectively converts the Python dictionaries into JSON strings and then writes all of it to the JSON file. Now, you might be thinking, why do I need to know that it serializes the data and it's not an actual dictionary that's being written? You don't need to do that, but it's good to know what is actually happening in here. Finally, if you look at the user data, doesn't look nice. Imagine if we had hundreds of keys and hundreds of values. What we can do in here instead is we can add a extra keyword parameter, and of course you know keyword parameters because you've learned it in the functions section. Now if I right click and I run and we look at the user data, you can see that it's formatted in a much nicer way. And I do recommend that you try and play around with this. So instead of 4, have a 3, right click and run, and look at that, nothing changes. I mean, let's try 1, and when I right click and I run, you can see that there we go, only 1 indentation. So 4 is the most beautiful one in my opinion. So let's go ahead and add some more information to this .json file. I'm going to get the user data. I'm going to add a new piece of information that is going to have the key as location and is going to be equal to New York. New York, that's how you write New York. And if you're not sure, you know what, let's keep it professional. If you're not sure how to work with dictionaries and keys and values, then of course you need to go back and watch the dictionaries video. I will leave it somewhere at the top. Now if I right click and I run, you can see that we've added a new location information. And finally, before moving on, let's go ahead and look at how we can read from a JSON file. So right here, I'm going to add the following code. Okay, so as you can see right here, I'm going to open this up. What we did is we opened up the file using the R mode, and instead of the .txt, we used the .json this time, and we put it in the variable f, and then we use the method load on the f, or on the JSON, the method. And basically what happened in here is we were able to extract the information from the JSON file. All right, fellow Python programmers, now you are fully equipped to go into the professional world, and if somebody says JSON, you know that it's not just some guy's name, you know that it's a file that stores information and was shared with you to dissect it, extract the information, and then use that information. But something that's very important when you're working with a file, and something that I've already mentioned before, when you're working with file, if you don't close it properly, you can sometimes have data leakage. You can go and research about data leakage and how it can destroy and corrupt your file. And if somebody hands you a very important file, or you're working with a file that's very big, like thousands of gigabytes, you wouldn't actually download it to your computer, you would be using it from a server. And if you corrupt that file, then you will have a big problem, especially with your boss. So to avoid such problems, we use the with, and that sort of fixes the issue. But what happens if during your opening and closing and during your operations on that file, you get an error and the file does not close before the program stops? You will have corruptions, and this can happen very, very easily, even right here locally. So in order to make sure that any error that is caused by our operations does not break and corrupt our files, we need to learn the try, except, and error handling. So let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, so as you can see right here, we've written the try except block. So basically, let's break it down. First of all, the try block contains the code that might raise an exception. And when I say exception, I mean error. So this might raise an error. The try, I mean, or this code, I mean, and the try block will handle it, will try it. In this case, the code in question is going to be result equals 5 divided by 0, which will attempt to divide 5 by 0, which of course is mathematically undefined and will raise an error. And when I say raise an error, we also mean raise an exception that will be the 0 division error. So the except block is going to execute if that zero division error is raised, and will catch it and will print out or execute whatever is inside of the except block. So if I right click and I run, instead of getting an error because I'm trying to divide 5 by 0, I get you cannot divide by 0. And if you think that this is just some hocus pocus and you're like, Michael, come on, like even if you try to divide by 0, it's no problem. Even before I run, you can see that result is highlighted. If I hover over it, read declared result, okay, result 1, let's call it that, right click and run, and we get an error. And what is that error? It's the 0 division error and division by 0. Basically, don't be a dumbass, don't divide by 0. And this try except block is particularly useful when you're trying to get an input. If you remember, we've done this a lot before, where we're trying to get a number from the user and then convert it into an integer so that we can compare it with another number. The problem with this approach is that if the user enters 5, that's great, no problems, the 5 is converted into an integer. But if, for example, the user enters Michael, you can see that we get a value error and it's invalid because you cannot convert Michael into an integer. Now, the way that we used to mitigate this is we would simply check, first of all, if it's a digit and only then convert it into an integer. But now with our newfound powers, we can actually try this out. Okay, so as you can see right here, we've put this inside of the try except block. So now we try to get the input and convert it into an integer. And if there is a value error raised, then we will, or error exception raised to be more specific, then we will print out invalid input, please enter a number. So when I right click and I run, enter a number, let's say 5, great, it works, right click and run, enter a number, Michael, hit enter, invalid input, please enter a number. And it's similar to an if statement to the point that you can even use an else block on this. So after we have the except, so as you can see right here, I added an else block, and this else block only executes if there is no exception. So for example, enter a number, if I type in Michael, or the wrong Michael, you can see that it's invalid and we don't get this output. But if we do it correctly, so right here, if I type in 15, hit enter, you entered 15 and everything works fine. So let's go back and actually use this error handling in our code. Okay, so as you can see right here, I've called up, or I created a variable right here that takes in the existing file.txt. And as you can see, if I look in my directory, I don't have that file. So when I try to open it in the reading mode, it should cause an error, no file found. And if you want, let's go ahead and actually test it out. I think that would be better. So if I copy and paste this right here, right click and run, and you can see file not found error. And these are the types of errors that we would like to avoid when working with files. So what I did is I put it inside of the try except block, and now when I right click and I run, you can see that the file no existing file.txt does not exist. Okay, fellow Python programmers, oh my god, you have learned so much. You are now almost at the end of the entire learning of the basics in Python. The last thing that you need to do is you need to put everything that you've learned today together, from reading to writing files to trying to find errors when reading, and you can use this try except block on anything and everywhere. So let's go ahead and delve into the mini project and the challenge that you need to complete. Okay, so it's time for some user registration. Congrats, you have been hired to create an application that registers user to a platform and allows them to log in. Congrats! First of all, you'll need to create a function, register user, that takes in the username and password of a person. You should then open a new users.json file in the R+ mode, and you have to research that. Next, you'll need to load information from the file and check if the username provided is already in the file. If they are, return to exit out of the function. If not, create a new entry for the user with a password. Next, you need to make sure that you seek before dumping the information, and you can also research that. And if you want, you can try to use this without the seek and see what happens. It's going to be crazy. So make sure that you do the seek, make sure you research and understand what this seek actually does. Next, what if the file is not found? Make sure that this all happens inside of a try except block with the appropriate errors checked. Next, you'll need to create a function that will log in the user, that takes the username and password, opens up the file in reading mode, and checks if the user name is there and password is correct. So first of all, you need to check if the username is in that file, and then check if the password that the user provided is associated and correct with that username. And finally, you'll need to create an infinite while loop that keeps asking the user if they want to either register or log in or exit out of the loop. And of course, whenever you ask them to register, you call the register user function. Whenever you want them to log in, you call the login user function. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow Python programmers, this is not an easy challenge. Take your time, try to do your best. Don't use ChatGPT, use Google instead, because I don't want you to solve this. I want you to try your best to solve this. Make sure that you try your absolute best and, well, again, solve this problem. Pause the video right now and go do the challenge. Okay, so there you go. As you can see, I've imported JSON and I've defined a new function. First, we take in the username and then we take in the password. Nothing too crazy in here. Okay, so after we've gotten the username and the password, we open up the file in the R+ mode. So what does the R+ mode do in here? The R+ mode opens it for both reading and writing at the same time. Why do we need it in this mode? Because we're going to be first reading it using the load, so we're getting the information to check if the username is already in there. If it is, then I'm going to tell it, please choose a different username. And if we do that, then we are going to return, meaning that we will exit out of the function. And if we don't exit out of the function at any point, then we're going to add that username. And the way we do this, we've already seen it, users username equals password. Okay, so as you can see right here, I told you, or I did exactly what I told you. Before I dumped all of the information into the file, I first made sure that I seeked or sooked, whatever, I seeked back to 0. And what does this exactly mean? And of course, I finally printed out and registered the user. So basically what we've done right here is we opened up the file in the R+ mode, which stands for reading and writing at the same time. And when we loaded the file, what happened is that our cursor, or let me open up the user data. So right here, when we read through this file, if we read the first line, the cursor is at an end. Just use the arrows and look at how they move. So this keeps moving, reading through every single line, and then it gets to the end and it finishes. And we've read through the entire file. So if we try to add information now, what will happen is a new dictionary will be created in here and information will start to get added, and that is not good. So what the seek0 does, it basically resets the pointer to the start of the file. So when we add a new user with a password, it will start right here from the top once they are added. So basically it will, instead of adding more to the file, it will simply overwrite all of the information, because remember, right here we are reading the users, we are updating the users, and then we're putting that information back into the JSON file. If we don't use the seek, and I'll show you what will happen when we don't use the seek, extra or the dictionaries will be added on top of each other, and basically we will corrupt this file. Okay, so what I've done in here, and something that you didn't need to do, but if you did, then congratulations. My initial intention was for you to just have the file already created, and I will provide it to you in the description so that you can actually open up a users.json file. But if you want to do it this way, where whenever you try to open that file and you don't find it, a new file that is called user.json is created, where you can read from, or actually write to. A new file is created and you write to it whatever the username and the password were. And of course we added it into the try except block, and as you can see, the try except block can be super helpful when working with files. Okay, so now it's time for the login function. As you can see, we've done something similar where we take in the username, we take in the password, then of course we add it into the try except block, because we don't want to read from a file that does not, or is not found, or does not exist. And then with the open, we open it up in the reading mode. Again, remember what does the with does? It makes sure that we close the file to avoid any data leakage. Once we open up the file, we get all of the information into the users, and the two things that we need to check for are that the username that we entered is actually in the users, which, remember, when we're doing this on a dictionary, we go through all of the keys, and the usernames are the keys, and that the username at the username key has the same password as the one that we've provided, or the user has provided, and we print out login successful, otherwise invalid username or password. And finally, we have the accept block, which checks for the file not found exception. If it does find it, we say that no registered users found, please register first, meaning that there is no file. Woo, finally we are done. So what I did in here is I created a new method. You don't have to do this, but from now on you do. So we created a new main method, and while true, we check for or get an input from the user. If the choice was register, then we call the register function. If the choice was login, we call the login. And if the choice was exit, we break out of the while loop, which effectively breaks out of the main function, and we stop the program. And of course, otherwise, if they don't use any of these three, we print out invalid choice, use one of those. And finally, we call the method to make everything work together. So when I right click and I run, boom, as you can see, it asks us, do you want to log in, register, or exit? And of course, since we're just starting out, I'm going to log in. Or actually, let's try to register and see what happens. Register, hit enter. As you can see, enter your name, Michael, username, password 123, hit enter. User registered successfully. Excellent, excellent, excellent. Let's try to log in. Since we're logging in and there's already a file, please enter your username. Kalen. Hit enter, enter your password. 45, hit enter. Invalid username. Do you want to log in, register, or exit? Let's check what we have so far. So when I open up the user, we need to finish it off. So exit, hit enter, boom. And now we have the user.json. So open up the user. This should be users, by the way. So as you can see, voila, we have Michael123. Amazing. Let's go ahead and right click and run. Let's try to log in. And if I log in with Michael and use the 123, oh my God, ladies and gentlemen, how cool is that? That is really, really amazing. Let's try to register someone. Let's register Kalen 945. So user registered successfully. Let's exit out and let's look at the users again. And voila, we have Kalen. Now, something that I would like to add in here, maybe whenever I am writing, so right here, file indent 4. Otherwise, I also want to add an indentation right here. So indent equals 4. So that later on, when I add somebody else with the register, let's try to add Michael again. Let's register Michael again, 78, hit enter. Username already exists. Please choose a different username. Let's add, I don't know, what name? Tim with a capital T and invalid choice. Okay, I apologize. Register first. Let's add Tim and 89, hit enter. Registered successfully. Let's exit out and let's check the users. All right, there we go. Now they are indented and they look very good. Let's now try to break this by removing the seek. And by the way, if you're doing this on an already existing file like the users, I recommend that you copy and paste it, but because you will have to wipe it out and start from scratch, this will break your entire code. Your entire data information. So right click, run. Let's try to log in. Everything should be fine. Let's try to log in as Tim. Let's use a wrong password like 32. Invalid username or password. Everything works fine. Let's try to register. And now I want to register as a llama. And I'm at the end of my creative thinking. So I used llama 203. Hit enter. Nice. Okay. Looks good. Registered successfully without the seek. Let's exit out. See, on the surface, everything looks to be good. But if we look at users, oh my God, look at what happened in here. Because we did not seek to the start, a completely new dictionary was added at the end. And now if I try to right click and I run, let's try to log in and I try llama. And what was the password? 203. Hit enter. Oh my God. Oh my God. My entire code is corrupted. My entire data is corrupted, destroyed. I cannot use this anymore. And of course I cannot use this because there is extra data on the column or line 5, column 2, line 5, column 2, extra data. No good. We have to remove this. Run again and try to log in with Michael with a password of 123. Login successful. We've saved the file. Fellow Python programmers, congratulations. I know this was a very long video, especially the testing, but the testing was as important as the code that we've wrote in the mini project. I hope you enjoyed. We are at the end. These are all the basic lessons that I'm going to teach you. You already have all the necessary information to start the next chapter of my channel, which is going to be exercises and mini projects in the next, not just mini projects, big projects. So in the next video, let me move the mic out of the way. I'm going to be doing my first exercise, so make sure to click right here. It's time for you to start exercising your Python knowledge. So right here, this is where you click. Let's go. Exercises. projects. Yes, this is how you grow as a Python programmers. Iteration, iteration, iteration. Do it again and again and again and again and again